From Viking-era artifacts preserved in the ice in Norway to a 19th century wagon hidden under a lake in the United States, here are some unexpected archaeological treasures that have been discovered around the world. Let's start. For a long time now, archaeologists specializing in ancient Rome have been particularly interested in Pompeii, the city infamous for the volcanic eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. These archaeologists are conducting in-depth studies on one of the most deadly natural disasters of all times in order to uncover new elements. But what a surprise when they made the discovery in November 2020 of two new bodies in the underground corridor of a villa in the Setiva Juliana area located 700 meters from Pompeii. After the discovery of these bodies, the archaeologists then set to work studying closely these two victims of the eruption of Vesuvius that were perfectly molded. Thanks to their analysis, they were not only able to estimate the age of the two victims, but also their status. Well, these two people were probably between 18 and 25 years old, and between 30 and 40 years old, respectively. And they would be a slave and his master, who were certainly trying to flee at the time of the eruption. The clothes that the two people wore that day, a simple tunic and a woolen coat, indeed testified to their status. Archaeologists had just found a new remnant of the eruption of Vesuvius. Nevertheless, this find, and in particular the discovery of the clothes worn by these two people at the time, left a great doubt in their minds about the true date of the eruption. Well, if the letter in which the politician and writer Pliny the Younger tells of the eruption of Vesuvius and the documents of the other historians are true, this eruption would have taken place in the middle of August. But can you wear a wool coat in summer? This new element is added to the other clues that raise questions about the true date of the disaster, such as this graffiti on the wall of a house made by a worker a few days before the eruption. The worker had taken care to date his inscription October 17. And then other clues like the autumn fruits found burned question the true date of the eruption that surprised the inhabitants of Pompeii. But it does not prevent the archaeologists from now resting on new elements that will help them deepen their research and will lead them to realize even more excavations on the site. In order to better highlight the eruption of Vesuvius, there is no doubt that the recent discovery of these two new bodies have made them even more motivated. A few years ago, Lars Holger Pilo, a Norwegian archaeologist, was visiting a mountainous region in the south of Norway with other archaeologists. With his colleagues, he had come to explore this region, which knew the melting of its ice sheets. But this archaeologist was far from suspecting that he would make an incredible discovery. Indeed, it is in this region that Philo attended with his colleagues to the update of an old wooden tunic dating from 1800 years. Fascinated and curious, this archaeologist then decided to continue with one of his colleagues the exploration of this mountainous site, which abounded in artifacts dating from the Viking era and reappeared following the melting of the ice plates. Philo was able to find a large number of objects that were at least 1,000 years old, but had remained perfectly preserved in the ice for all that time. These objects, including horseshoes, broken sleds, clothing, kitchen utensils, a small piece of wood, and many other tools, belonged to travelers who had used this mountain path during a period of prosperous trade. Philo had discovered a treasure, of course. Nevertheless, this discovery had a bitter taste for him because the melting of the ice plates may bring out artifacts from an old time. But it, unfortunately, reminds us of global warming that the planet is experiencing nowadays. However, this did not prevent the Norwegian archaeologist from feeling a giant satisfaction while he was analyzing the precious objects with his colleagues. Thanks to this incredible discovery, which had just revealed a whole part of history, Lars Holger Pilo's name is now linked to Viking-era artifacts in Norway and around the world. Do you like this video? Then don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to receive all the notifications and not miss anything of our next publication. Let's continue. The inhabitants of the village of Aral Sea, located in the city of Mysore, India, always known that the lake they live near contained something a little special. Of course, their greatest desire was to know what was in the water, but their curiosity became even greater when they discovered that two statue heads appeared as the water level of the lake dropped. Some of the inhabitants of this village decided to dig a little to discover what it was about, and their efforts paid off. Indeed, the success in finding two gigantic statues of Nandi dating from several centuries, and yes, these two statues were facing each other and which were carved in monolithic steatite, were unearthed from a bed of this dried-up lake. But this find has somewhat broken the quietude in which the inhabitants of the village lived. with the arrival of a team of archaeologists and specialists. Normal, since it was a great discovery. However, these inhabitants can now rest on their laurels because their curiosity is today satisfied. Well, not quite, because some of the inhabitants estimate that apart from these statues of Nandi, there is a whole temple under the lake. Well, that's what would make them even more curious and would push them to dig again, maybe. The inhabitants of Jiangxi province in the southeast of China can consider themselves lucky to live near the Great Haoyang Lake. That's right, but like everyone who lives near a water source, the people of this province need to cross a bridge to reach the other side of the lake. The people of Jiangxi province have a bridge, of course, but not just any bridge. Well, it is actually an old stone bridge, about 400 years old, which had remained under the water of the lake far too long and finally appeared after the water level dropped. This is surprising. The inhabitants of this Chinese province, as well as the tourists, often go to this dry lake, happy to be able to walk on the ancient bridge entirely made of granite, which is 2.93 meters long and which dates from the time of the Ming Dynasty. The bridge, called Kainian, which means 1,000 holes in Chinese, is reference to the 1,000 holes it has. It's considered the longest stone bridge in China. However, if this unusual walk brings a lot of pleasure and joy to the inhabitants of this province and to the tourists who come to discover this bridge, some of them, especially the defenders of the environment, cannot help feeling a lot of sadness when seeing the desolate landscape. Indeed, the largest freshwater reserve of the country dried up because of the low rainfall and the construction of a dam, affected both the fauna and the fishermen who took advantage of the resources of this lake. And yet, these people cannot deny that the appearance of such a vestige is almost a miracle. This is what fascinates them in spite of everything and would push them to go again and again to this incredible bridge. Some time ago, you were watching a television report on the world's largest seas. You have always been fascinated by the seas and oceans since you were a child, so you decided to watch the report all the way through. But suddenly, your attention was drawn to a striking image showing not a sea, but rather a desert. That's right, a gigantic area with a stranded ship. Incredibly surprised, you turn up the volume to find out more about this area known as the Aral Sea. That's what this dried up area you've never heard of before is called. You then discovered that it is not actually a sea, but a lake that is located between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The report also allowed you to know the real reasons that transformed a whole part of this lake, which was once considered the fourth largest lake in the world, into a real desert. Well, the Aral Sea was largely exploited by the Soviet government at the time. Indeed, the latter used large quantities of water from this lake to irrigate its crops, especially cotton. Result, from the 60s, the Aral Sea, which was once a source of wealth for the neighboring villages, has experienced a decline in its water level and an increase in its salinity, which has caused a loss of biodiversity and a deterioration of living conditions for the local population, a real environmental disaster. One can easily imagine how annoyed and saddened you were by all this information. Only at the beginning, because you learned at the end of the report that the Aral Sea is getting better and better since 2005, especially on the side of Kazakhstan. And this thanks to the restoration project financed by the World Bank, which aims at raising the water level again and reducing the salinity level. This is reassuring. However, you must admit that since this day, your interest for the Aral Sea has not stopped growing. Everyone knows that archaeologists spend their time excavating various sites and places around the world. Moreover, they often have to carry out excavations for a long time in order to find ancient remains or other treasures. But sometimes they can make incredible discoveries, like this village they found in the Doubs region of France. That's right. After spending over a year excavating the area, archaeologists came across the foundations of an entire village dating back to the early Middle Ages. This unique Merovingian village, which dates back to the 6th and 7th centuries, even had a necropolis, tombs containing various precious objects, as well as a very rare wooden church with a basilica plan, in addition to the large buildings of 200 to 300 meters squared, each which would have been used to house inhabitants as well as the animals. This village with Germanic architecture would testify to the conquest of the Franks at this time. After closely studying the village, archaeologists came to the conclusion that it was occupied for about 200 years. Not only that, but they also discovered that the site had been occupied by humans. Not only that, but they discovered that the site had been occupied by humans who lived in the Mesolithic era, 10,000 to 6,000 years before Christ. This is an interesting discovery, but it required a lot of time for these archaeologists. Nevertheless, they can boast of having found a typical and unique village in France. We can clearly imagine the enchantment they must still feel after this incredible discovery. Dr. Zahn is an American who lives in the state of Oregon on the west coast of the United States, a region that has experienced a major drought in recent years. Like everyone else in the area, this deputy sheriff witnessed the drop in water levels in Detroit Lake, a dammed lake that eventually revealed the remains of the village of Old Detroit that had been abandoned and swallowed up during the 1950s for the purpose of building the dam. However, while exploring the area in search of some treasure, this man came across a 19th century wagon preserved in perfect condition thanks to the low oxygen levels. Dave Zahn immediately grabbed his camera and managed to take some pictures of this wagon that was made in 1875. Nevertheless, this discovery was going to cause him some concern because our friend did not want vandals to come and plunder the bottom of this lake, which must be full of treasures. He must feel a great relief after the water levels rose again in the lake, swallowing the cart which now lies under the water. There is no denying it, but Dave Zahn is now one of those people who would be described as very lucky. Yes, at least he got to go see this Wild West wagon with his own eyes. You have just discovered some of the greatest archaeological treasures. Tell me, which of these discoveries has fascinated you the most, or on the contrary, shocked you? Leave us your answers in the comments. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video.